Okay. Now we have a topics, the memory organization for this week, and basically these topics will be discussed before we talk about the H051 and the Arduino, but because due to the laboratory, we move our Arduino and H051 um, before the hardware introduction to you. Now, for the memory organization, remember our CPU structure or the computer structure. We're using a system like a connection with a CPU and then connecting to the memory. And the memory, the function is that it is going to have some data storage for our program. Okay, so here we are going to talk about how the memory can help our CPU to store the data. Now you can see in our objective, now we will first give you the memory overview, and then we spend some of our time in the cache memory. Basically, it is a memory device that sits in between CPU and the memory. We have the cache memory. Okay, in order to speed up our data transfer from the memory. Okay, so we will talk about the design in the mapping and the replacement algorithm in the cache memory. And we are going to talk about the internal memory. And then we come to the program allocation schemes so that you can get more understanding on how the program load into the memory. And we have some modern technique so that we can bring the data or the program of into the memory become more efficient. Now the two scheme we will describe, it is the paging and also the segmentation. Okay. Now for the memory, we have some characteristics that we are going to describe. Now we have the location, where, that means where we put the memory. We have the capacity, so that how large of your memory, and the unit of transfer, whether it can be bit or byte. Right? The access method, whether we have sequential access, random access, etc. The performance, we mainly concern about the speed of the memory, right? And the physical type, that means the in terms of transistor level, how can we build our memory device, and the physical characteristic as well, so that we talk about the supplying voltage, supplying current, how to drive the memory unit, and finally the organization. Now we will describe each of the characteristics one by one with you. Now for the location and capacity, now we found that it depends on the function of the memory. It can be appear in different locations inside the computer. For example, the cache memory can be found inside the CPU or in the internal inside the CPU or externally connecting through the bus, right? So it depends on how you implement the memory inside or the cache memory inside the computer. Later, we will show you a hierarchy about the memory. You may see that when you bring the cache memory into the CPU, you can have a faster speed, but at the same time, the CPU size will become larger because you have the memory dies occupy some of the space of your CPU. And we also talk about the word size, so that the unit, when we're going to transfer the data, It can be transferred in terms of bit, byte, or word, or double word. It depends on the data bus, the size of the data bus. Okay, you can have the word transfer or the byte transfer for the location and the capacity. Now for the transfer internally, in the lecture one, we showed you that for the CPU, actually, it contains some internal bus. Okay, so you may consider that inside the CPU, we have an ALU, and that it can access the memory through the internal bus. Okay. Externally, actually, it relies on the bus, the computer bus, to transfer the data. And nowadays, we do not rely on the transfer in terms of byte by byte because it is not efficient. Instead, we transfer the memory in terms of block. For example, when you access the memory for some specific function, instead of transfer the byte from the memory to the CPU, we will transfer a block of memory. For example, we may transfer, say, 1 to 8 bytes. Okay. Now, at one time, you may see that we may use only the single byte in this 1 to 8 bytes, but due to we predict the other bytes in this 1 to 8 bytes will be also accessed. So therefore, this block of memory will be bring into the CPU to process. And it also depends on the addressable unit. And it specifies to you that the smallest location that you can usually address. Now, for example, if you remember, we told you in the sehs3317 tutorial, the smallest addressable memory size is a bit, right? That means you put a address onto the address bus, and the memory module will return a data in the form of a bit. But most likely, for example, in the Intel CPU, the basic unit for the transfer is a byte. Okay, and internally you can do everything because it depends on the internal data bus. For example, you can transfer a word, which is corresponding to 16 bits. Okay. Now, for the access method, it depends on the memory organization or the physical nature of the memory. We have different access methods. Now, the oldest way to access the memory, we using the sequential approach because at that time, we use a magnetic tape to store our data. I don't know whether you see the magnetic type before. It looked like a type that record the sound data, and we use a magnetic head to read the data. And by rotating these two slots, the magnetic type will pass over the head so that the data can be read. Okay. Now this approach we so-called the sequential approach because we start reading the data from the beginning and then in an order. So the access time depends on the location of the data. If it is in the front of the tab, you can access the data quickly. However, if the data locating at the end of the tab, it makes the access time become longer, right? Now the second, we have the direct access. Now so that the example is a disk. Now for the direct access, we can see the structure of a disk that a hard disk, we have the structure like that. The disk can be rotated, and we have a magnetic head to read the data. Okay. So you can see that the head can be moved in the arm of the hard disk, so that the reading of the data become a two-dimensional mechanism, so that it becomes easier to read the data. So for example, to read a data, you can see you can make the disk rotating at this sector, and then the head move in this position, so that this block of data can be read. Okay. Now, therefore, now in this approach, individual blocks have unique address, and it can have a jumping because by rotating the disk and moving the position of the head in the arm, and then you can jump to read the data from the disk. Okay. And the access time depends on the location of the data and the previous location, because if you say the next data to be read is locating at here, you can say we needed to rotate the disk so that this sector come under to the head, and at the same time you are going to move the head also to read the data. Okay, so it depends on the previous location of the head and the disk. Now the next one, we have the random access, and actually now you can put your address to access the RAM, and the access time is independent to the location and the previous location, because at any time you can access any data in the RAM module, because the RAM, the full RAM should be random access memory. Okay, so from the RAM, it tells you that it can access any location inside the RAM module in order to get the data or write the data. Okay. Now, finally, we have the associative access method. In this method, it makes the comparison between the two stores before you read the data. And the example is the cache memory, because when the system implement a cache memory, as I told you, it sits between the CPU and the memory, and these two memory module contain the same data. Okay, so when we access the data, the CPU will first look at the cache memory. If the data present in the cache memory, then the data can be get into the CPU. Okay. Otherwise, if the cache memory does not contain the data, the CPU will read from the main memory. Therefore, we have a comparison between the different memory module in order to get the data. And this approach, it is so-called the associative approach. Okay. Now you can see that it depends on the hardware, and you can apply different access methods to get the data. Now here we give you the memory hierarchy. Now you can see that it looks like a pyramid, and at the top of the pyramid, now we have a very fast memory, but at the same time it is very expensive. Okay, and also the cost at the head of or at the top of the pyramid is also high. Okay, so when you bring the memory along the towards the bottom of the pyramid, you have a slower speed, less expensive memory, and at the same time the size. Actually, we also talk about the size. The size should be larger for at the bottom of the pyramid. And actually, you can see that at the top of the pyramid, we have the register, which should be the most expensive memory and the farthest memory in the hierarchy. And when you move towards the bottom, now we have the main memory in the middle, so that it has certain affordable speed, but the size is not large. At the same time, the cost is not is moderate, we may say. And at the bottom, we have the backing store, and most likely nowadays we're using hard disks, right? So that we can store a lot of our data on the hard disk, okay? And the speed should be slower. So normally when you run a program, you better move your program from the hard disk to the main memory. Now, when you measure the performance of the memory, you needed to take care about the time. Basically, we are talking about the speed. Okay. And in terms of speed, we needed to take care about the access time. That means the time between when you present the address and then getting the data. Okay, remember, we have some steps for the CPU to get the data from the memory. Okay, we can refer back to the lecture 1. We describe the access steps for the data to you in lecture 1. The next measurement, we have the memory cycle, that it is the time required for the memory to recover. Because in between each access, the memory should be returned to the ground state in order to enable the next access. Okay, therefore it is the time for the memory to recover, and the cycle time. Actually, we combine the access time and the recover time, and it becomes the memory cycle time. Okay. The next one, we have the transfer rate. It depends on the physical characteristic of your circuit, due to the fact that if you remember in the basic electricity and electronics, we have a effect so-called the RC effect, okay, the transient effect. Now, when this is our time constant. Now, if we have a large time constant, that means the charging rate or discharging rate become very long. At that time, it affects the transfer time, okay, because the actual timing diagram for the memory should be somehow like this one, okay. It may not be a square wave due to the RC charging time, okay, the time constant. So the memory will operate until the voltage level reach to a certain level. Therefore, it affects your transfer time, right? Now, for the physical type and characteristics, for the types, we have different category. We have already told you. Now, in terms of semiconductor, we make them to become register, cache memory, or RAM, right? In the when we're using the magnetic wave, we can have the technology that we use in disk or tape, and we have also the optical method, for example, CD, and DVD. And nowadays, we may see that we rely on the optical method less and less, because we can have another type, so-called internet, okay, or cloud, okay, so that we store our data on the cloud and get or write the data through the internet. Okay. Now, for the characteristics, we talk about the delay, so that the transfer time, the volatility, that means whether when you power off the system, the data will run away. Okay. And we erasable, so that whether it support read-write operation. And lastly, for the power consumption, especially for today, we are talking about the mobile computing. We hope our memory module can consume as less as power as possible. Okay. Now, as we told you from the memory hierarchy, basically we can study the speed and the cost for different type of memory. And you can see that we have register, it should be has the faster speed, okay? And but at the same time, it is the most expensive, okay? And when you run down to the hierarchy, you can see we have L1 cache. It should be implemented into the CPU, L2 cache, or even nowadays we have L3 cache. L stand for level, and it classifies the speed of the cache. And then we have the main memory, disk cache, disk, optical, and finally we have type. Okay, and now you can see that we have a term tell you we have the organization method, so-called interleave. Now the interleave, that means we implement the memory band in our memory, so that when we access the data, we will have a block transfer into the memory instead of byte by byte. Okay. Therefore, actually, we have introduced to you this idea before. Nowadays we make use of the block transfer from the memory in order to improve the efficiency of our memory access. Now, the locality of reference, actually, we have told you in our C++ language, because normally when you have a program, okay, the address is continuous. Okay, for example, your program may start from 00 up to 0055 FF, and we allocate a continuous memory for your program so that at any time when you access your program, you can make a block transfer to the memory so that you can have a more efficient way to access your program. And this is what we call the locality of reference. That means when you access a specific location for the code, the next statement or code will also be accessed. Okay. Now we spend some of our time to explain to you the operation of the cache memory. As we say, it is sit between CPU, okay, and also the main memory. And it is a small, fast memory, but it is more amount. Now, when you compare of the capacity, you may say for the main memory, you may have a 4 megabyte memory, but for the cache memory, we may have a smaller size. For example, it may have only 64 kilobytes cache memory. Okay, and so nowadays the cache memory has been implemented inside the CPU chip, and in order to by you implement cache memory into the CPU, that means you can make the data access become faster. Okay, because you do not require the external bus to for the data transfer. Now, for the operation of the cache, you can see that now when the CPU requests the content from the memory location, it first checks the cache for the data. If the cache memory contains the data, then the data will bring into the CPU. Okay. If not present, then the whole block containing the data that you are going to access in the main memory will be transferred into the cache memory due to the reason of locality of reference. Okay, so we transfer a block into the memory, and then the data will be transferred from the cache to the CPU. Okay. Now the CPU will include the text to identify which block of the memory is relating to which cache line. Okay. Now the text basically it is a logical address, and we will describe the tag to you immediately. Now for the cache designs, actually, if you are a designer of the CPU, you can determine the size, the mapping function, so that how can you bring the main memory data to the cache, and also the replacement algorithm. Now these two idea we will tell you immediately. Also the write policy, okay, so that when you update the cache together with the main memory, how can we make the update? The block size, to remember, when you write the data to the cache, you bring the whole block into the memory. So you needed to determine the size of the block. The number of cache line, so that we needed to add another line. Line means at any time how much data you can access. Okay, we will give you this idea immediately. And the cost, the rule is that when you have more cache, it becomes more expensive. And also the speed should be faster, because the cache memory can speed up the memory access. Okay. Now here we have the typical organization for the cache memory. And actually, you can see that the processor can control the cache memory. Now when you can see that it will give the address to the system bus when it is going to fetch a data. And this address will be used to look at the cache to see whether data is already present in the cache memory. If yes, it will return. The data will be returned to the processor. Otherwise, the address will bring into the system bus to ask the RAM to give the data. And then the data will be read into the CPU. Okay? Now, we told you that due to the cache memory and the main memory have different size. Therefore, we needed to have a mapping function so that we can map the data from the main memory into the cache memory. Now, here we give you an example that if we have a cache memory with 64 kilobytes, and we say if we group 4 bytes into a line, so that for each memory cache, it occupied by 4 bytes. Okay, and therefore, if you divide 64K by 4, it gives you 16K, right? And this becomes the address, okay, of the cache memory. So that altogether, in your cache memory, you have 16K address. Okay, and each memory location or memory line, okay, it occupies 4 bytes. Altogether, we have 4 kilobytes for the cache memory. Now, if now we have the main memory that have 16 megabytes, now this is our RAM size. So we have the address equal to 24-bit address. Okay. So we introduced the mapping function, and so far we have 3 types of mapping function using in the cache memory. The first one, it is so-called the direct mapping. Now in the direct mapping, now we say that each block of the main memory maps to only one cache line. Okay, so that if you later we will see that we will break down the main memory address, and for the main memory address, a part of the address is specified a tag. Tag means the cache address. And if, say for example, this tag is 001, that means this data should always write to the cache memory with the same tag 0001, right? So we say that it is only mapped to one cache line or one specific place. Okay. Now, if we say the address is divided into two parts for the cache memory, now remember we have 16.4K bytes in our example. The least significant bit, W bit, means the word. So in our example, we have 4 bytes. Therefore, it corresponding to 2 bits. And the rest most significant S bit represent the memory block. So it should be 16 minus 2, it is equal to 14. So our cache memory will be divided into two parts, 2 plus 14. Okay. Now, this tag will be further used to in our main memory address. Therefore, in the main memory address, we have 24 bits, and therefore our tag can be represented by this is S and this is W. Now, in terms of the main memory, this is not S. S, W, if the whole address occupy 24 bits, S will become 22 bits. Okay, and because we use 14 bits to specify the cache location, therefore we further divide S into two parts. This is 14 bits, and the first 8 bit will become a tag. Okay, not a tag. It shows to you whether the memory contain the data in the cache memory. Now I will show you an example. You may get more key understanding on this part. Okay. Now you can see that now our direct mapping. Now our 24-bit address has been divided into 3 parts. 8-bit, the most significant 8-bit will become a tag. The next 14-bit will represent the line. It is the cache memory address. And the last 2-bit will represent which bytes in the cache memory you are going to access. Okay, so you can see that we're using the tag to see whether the data has been stored in the cache memory for using the tracking. Now we show you an example. You can see what happened later. But here, let me show you the mapping. Now, for the main memory, you can see that we partition into a number of memory block. The lowest address we have 0 to n-1. We say that the number of address containing in each block should be m address. Okay, so for the first block we have 0 to m-1. For the next block we have the address m up to 2m-1. The next block we have 2m up to 3m-1, etc., etc. Okay. Now inside each block, we can see that when you map the line or the data into the cache, we have only one way, so that If the block has a address 0, it maps to the cache 9, 0. If the address in main memory equal to 1, it maps to 1. If the address has an address m-1, it maps to m-1. We have only one location, but not all inside the cache memory. And this is what we call the direct mapping. Okay? So now you can see in this diagram, this is how we break down the memory address in order to access the memory. Now you can see that our main memory, this is 24-bit. Okay? And you can see that we break down into 3 parts, 8-bit, 14-bit, and 2-bit. Now, when you are going to access the data, the cache module will first use the TAG to compare the cache memory for the same TAG. Okay? So if you can see that we break down the memory. Now we have 64 kilobytes for the cache memory, and each block containing 4 bytes. Therefore, here we have 16 kilobytes for the cache tag, and we will use this 16 kilobyte address to be compared with the tag address. If we found any one of the tag hits, so that the data has been located in the cache memory, and then we will bring also the word and the tag and the line in order to access the data, and then bring the data into the CPU. Okay, and this is what we call hit. We found the data in the cache. Otherwise, if the data is not inside the cache, we say miss, so that the CPU will use the address to access the main memory, and then bring the data to the cache at the same time bring into the CPU. Okay. Now here we bring you a more clear example that we have an address example. Now you can see that to the left hand side we have the main memory. Okay, we have 16 megabytes memory. Okay. Now you can see that it is the data stored inside the main memory block, and which of them occupied by 4 bytes. And we have the address, and the line plus word we grouped it into some memory block. Okay, and altogether we have 256 memory block, and each block we have a size equal to 64 kilobytes. Okay. Now when you operate the cache memory, you can see that if we say the data stored in the address 00000, that means 60. It has been stored into the cache memory. When the data is going to be accessed, it will first read the tag to check whether the tag is inside in the cache memory, and then we use the 9 to see whether this 9 is this 9 should be the same in the cache memory, so we get the data. Okay, and similarly, if we have a address 16 at the tag equal to 16, you can check if we are going to access this data with the address sehs3317C. Then we check whether the tag is inside. Okay, and then for the line and word, this number is required to dividing by 4 in order to get the line number. Now, because these are just representing line plus word, okay, so that it is a 16-bit address. So if you dividing by 4, it gives you the line number, and it gives you 0CE7. And then you use this line number to check whether the it should be present because the tag is hit. It uses this data address, the line number, to get the data from the cache memory. Okay. Now one more example. For example, now we are going to access the data from the FFF8, and we check the tag. This line we have FF, so it should be a hit. And then we use FFF8 dividing by 4. It gives you VFFE. So this line will give you a data. Okay. Now, all of these examples shows you a hit. How about if I have a miss? For example, if I have the second data 00004, the tag number is 00. And now you look at the second line of the cache memory. It is a 16, right? That means 00004 does not containing in the cache memory. Therefore, it is a miss. And then we will bring the data from the main memory instead of the cache memory. Okay? Now here we give you a summary on the direct mapping. Now you can see the address length equal to S plus W. Remember our S equal to 22 in this example, W equal to 2. So the number of addressable units is equal to 2 to the power 2 plus W, because it is the main memory size. The block size for the cache, it is equal to 2 to the W works. Because we have 4 bytes, therefore it is equal to 2 to the power 2 works or bytes in the cache memory. The number of blocks in the main memory, it is equal to 2 to the power S. Okay, or it should be S minus number of blocks. It should be a typo here, because remember, this should be H in our example. So we have S minus R in here. Okay. And the number of lines in the cache should be equal to 2R, 2 to the power R. And the size of tag R, in this case, we have 14. Okay. Size of tag, it is equal to H in our example. Now, for the direct mapping, we found that this mapping is very simple because you only check the tag. If the tag is inside the cache, you should know that the data is inside the cache. So it is simple and not expensive. Now, however, the disadvantage is that it has fixed location for the memory block. You cannot choose the other block to store your data. Therefore, if your program is alternatively accessing 2 blocks that mapping to the same line, then the missing rate is very high, and it may be a problem. So that you will access the main memory frequently. Okay, and therefore, in order to solve our problem, now we have another approach, so-called the associative mapping. Now, in this mapping, instead of storing the data into a single line, we can allow to have any line storing. Okay, and the memory address is interpreted as tag and word only. It divides into two parts, and the tag is required to check inside the memory and the cache memory. Okay, you needed to examine every tag inside the cache. As a result, the searching becomes very expensive because we have a large number of tags required to search when you compare with the direct mapping. Now here we show you the organization. You can see that the main memory divided into two parts. In our example, if you have 24 bits for the address, the first 22 bits will become the address, the tag. The word will become 4 bit, 2 bit. Okay. So for 22 bit, it tells you that we have a 4 megabyte location. You are going to check inside the tag. Okay. Now, therefore, in the cache memory, we implement the tag by 22 bits. So we needed to compare all the 22 bits to find whether the data inside the cache. Therefore, you can see that the checking or the searching become very expensive. As a result, if you say our data is locating at the beginning of our chat, it becomes very fast. However, if you say, oh, our location is our cache data is locating at the end of the tag, then you have already checked the whole 4 megabyte tag, and that means the memory access becomes slow at that time. Okay. Now you can see the mapping here. Now we can see that the address is divided into two parts. Now we're using this one as an example. The first 16 bit. Sorry, the first 20 bits should be together with the it should be dividing by 4 in order to produce the tag. We're using 1633. We better using another one because we need this is not present in the tag. Now, when you're looking at this example, we're using 16339C. When you divide it by 4, it gives you 058CE7. Now this becomes our tag. If you are going to access this data, you're using this tag to check inside the cache memory to see whether this tag is present in the cache. And luckily, you can find that the second position store this tag, so you can quickly return the data to the CPU. However, if you say, oh, I'm going to check which one? The last one. Okay. Again, when you produce the tag, you make the calculation FFF C dividing by 4, and it gives you 3FFFF. That means this one. And you are very unlucky because this is the last room or last line in the cache memory. So you have already checked the first nearly 4 megabyte tag in order to find the data. So this will become expensive in terms of speed, right? So by implementing the associative mapping approach, you better to have a fast searching methods in order to locate your data quickly in the cache memory. Okay. Now here we give you more information about our example. Our tag is 22-bit, and you have a 2-bit for the word. Okay, and this 2-bit, this 32-bit means we are going to access 4 bytes in our cache. Okay, so every access you needed to compare the field tag, the text field, in order to find whether we have a hit in the cache memory. And the least significant bit will specify which 2 bytes, which 4 bytes is inside the cache memory. And we give you the example before. FFFFC, the tag basically you should divide it by 4. So it gives you, according to our example here, it gives you the tag which is equal to, it should be a table. We have a VFFFF here. Okay, and the data is here, and the cache line is, you see this VFFF. Okay, no VFF, because when you produce this cache line, you needed to divide VFFFF by 4 in order to produce a cache line. Okay, it gives you VFFF. Now here we have the summary for the associative mapping. You can see the address length combined to become S plus W, where we have S equal to 22, W equal to 2. And again, the number of addressable unit equal to 2 to the power S plus W, that means 16 megabytes. The box size should be 2 to the power 2, because we have 4 bytes for a box. The number of blocks in the main memory, again, we're using the tag. It should be 2 to the power 22 in this example. Okay. And the number of lines in a cache, it can be determined because it is uncorrelated. The cache memory line is not used to in a calculation on the main memory address. Therefore, we can extend the cache easily. By implementing more cache memory, you can have more cache line. And the size of tag is to be AS bit. Okay, that means 22-bit. Okay. Now you can see we have already told you 2 approach, and one is direct approach that we do not have choice to store our data in the cache. On the other extreme, we have too many choice because we can store our data anywhere inside the cache. Each of them have its difficulty or problem. So how about we have a hybrid approach? We allow the data can be stored in somewhere, but not whole. But at the same time, we can reduce the number of services. This is what we introduced to you here. It is so-called the sehs associative mapping. Okay. Now, but I think before we continue, now we better take a short break, and we will resume the class at around 9:35. Okay.